started noticing something else behind the rhinestones. A quieter, heavier kind of honesty. The jokes still land, the music still soars. Yet the choices she's been making lately feel like someone carefully protecting what matters most, while preparing for a future she doesn't fully control. And the most emotional part? It isn't a comeback or a scandal or even a farewell tour. It's what she's been doing when nobody's watching. And why? Dolly Parton turning 80 should have been a simple headline. A living legend hits a milestone. The internet throws glitter, country music bows, and everybody reposts the same clips. The big laugh, the perfectly timed one-liner. The "I'm just a backwoods Barbie" charm that somehow still feels brand new after 6 decades. And that did happen. But if you watched closely, really closely, something else happened too. The celebration came with a strange, quiet undertone. Not sadness exactly, more like a hush, like even the loudest admirers were instinctively lowering their voices around her. The way people do when they're standing near something sacred. Because Dolly didn't just turn 80. She arrived at 80 with a kind of calm control that felt different from the Dolly we're used to. In past milestone years, Dolly treated aging like a punchline. She'd crack jokes about her hair, her heels, her maintenance, and then slam the door on any serious questions with a grin so bright you'd forget you asked. She made it look easy. Keep working, keep laughing, keep dazzling. But around her 80th birthday, her words started landing differently. Still funny, always funny, but threaded with something more honest. She wasn't doing that thing celebrities do where they pretend time isn't real. Dolly has never pretended. She's always been surprisingly blunt about what aging costs. She just wrapped it in humor so nobody got uncomfortable. Except now, the humor was still there, but the pause after it felt longer. And that's where fans started to feel it. Dolly wasn't changing into someone else. She was letting people see a little more of who she's always been underneath the rhinestones. Someone who understands time in a way most of us don't, because she spent her whole life measuring it in songs, in tours, in seasons of reinvention. So when she hits 80, it doesn't feel like another birthday. It feels like a chapter marker. Here's the thing about Dolly Parton. She's one of the rare celebrities people don't just admire. They lean on her. For a lot of fans, she's comfort food in human form. You don't just listen to Dolly. You return to Dolly. You put her on when the world's too loud, or when you're trying to remember what kindness looks like. Which is why the mood shift matters. Because lately, especially in the years leading up to 80, Dolly's career choices have looked less like someone chasing another spotlight moment and more like someone curating something, protecting something. You can see it in how she talks about her time. More selective, more intentional. She'll still pop up for a project that excites her, or an appearance that feels meaningful, but she's not moving with the same yes to everything energy people expect from a workhorse icon. And fans noticed. Dolly has been quietly tightening her circle. Not isolating, Dolly's not that kind of person, but organizing, prioritizing, the way someone does when they're guarding their peace like it's the most valuable thing they own. And if you want proof, look at the contrast. On one hand, Dolly can still dominate a moment with ease. She's done big, high-profile swings in recent years, genre experiments, major public appearances, surprise moments that remind everyone she's not a museum piece. She's a force. She can still command a room with one sentence. But on the other hand, she's been repeatedly honest about limits. She's talked openly about not wanting to tour the way she used to. She said, in her own plain-spoken way, that life changes, your body changes, your priorities change. And when Dolly Parton starts sounding like she's measuring her energy more carefully, it hits differently, because if Dolly is taking a breath, what does she know that we don't? That's what people couldn't quite explain around her 80th birthday. It wasn't that she looked different. Dolly's always been Dolly, and she's never apologized for the way she presents herself. It wasn't that she suddenly stopped working. She didn't. It wasn't that she lost her sparkle. She didn't. It was the feeling that the sparkle was being used more selectively. Like she wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Like she was choosing moments, not chasing them. And in celebrity culture, that kind of shift usually points to one of two things. Either someone is finally protecting their mental health, or something has changed privately that they don't want to turn into a public storyline. Because Dolly's life has always had two versions. the one she gives to the world, and the one she fiercely protects. And as the world celebrated Dolly at 80, the protected version started casting a longer shadow. So the big question becomes, what was happening off camera that made this milestone feel less like a party and more like a quiet, personal turning point? Because when you trace that answer back, you keep running into the same name, the same missing presence, the same private anchor Dolly has shielded for decades. And that's where this story actually starts. If Dolly Parton has a superpower, besides writing songs that feel like they've lived your life for you, it's this. She can tell you everything and still keep the most important parts private. And no one represents that better than her husband, Carl Dean. Dolly Parton has spent her whole life making the world feel brighter. Bigger hair, bigger smiles, bigger songs. But as she hit 80, for newer fans, Carl almost sounds like a myth. The man exists, but barely exists in Dolly's public universe. No red carpets, no awards show kisses, no couple interviews where they finish each other's sentences. Just Dolly, glowing, joking, deflecting, and then the occasional warm, matter-of-fact reminder that yes, she's been married this whole time, and no, you're not getting access to it. They married in 1966, long before Dolly became the global symbol she is now. And while she built one of the most public-facing careers in entertainment history, Carl stayed rooted in the opposite direction. Ordinary life, private routines, no interest in being part of the show. That contrast isn't just a quirky fun fact. It's the key to understanding why Dolly at 80 feels different. Because if the world sees Dolly as America's comfort person, Carl has always been Dolly's comfort person. The one place she didn't have to perform. The one relationship that wasn't a brand. The one space where she could take off the wig, wipe off the lashes, and just be a woman from Tennessee who fell in love young and never stopped choosing that love. And Dolly has been unusually consistent about what she will and won't share. She'll tell stories about how they met. She'll laugh about how he prefers staying out of the spotlight. She'll mention how he'll give her honest feedback. Sometimes blunt, sometimes hilarious. She's even joked about what he does and doesn't like about fame. But when the questions drift toward the deeper stuff, how they manage, what they've been through, what it feels like as time moves on, Dolly's tone changes. Not colder, just firmer. That's not an accident. That's boundary. And as she's gotten older, that boundary has become more noticeable, because the public's curiosity has gotten louder. People have always wondered about the marriage. They've questioned it, romanticized it, misunderstood it. They've tried to turn Carl Dean into a mystery to solve, instead of a human being who simply chose a life off camera. And Dolly knows exactly how dangerous that curiosity can be. Because celebrity culture doesn't just ask questions, consumes answers. It turns private realities into public entertainment. It drags ordinary people into headlines they never asked for. So Dolly has done what she always does best. She controls the narrative by refusing to feed it. But here's where it gets emotional. Around a big milestone like 80, the Carl Dean factor doesn't just feel like trivia, it starts to feel like context. Because suddenly, all those recent choices fans have been clocking, the selectiveness, the calmer schedule, the more reflective tone, can be read through one simple lens. Dolly isn't only managing her own career anymore. She's protecting a life. And if Carl has always been private, the older they get, the more that privacy matters. Not because there's some dramatic secret begging to be exposed, but because aging is personal. It's intimate. It comes with fragile moments you don't want turned into clickbait, no matter how famous you are. This is the part people miss about Dolly. She's not secretive because she's hiding something scandalous. She's secretive because she's loyal. And loyalty, for her, isn't a hallmark word. It's a practice. It's why she's never let the world turn Carl into content. It's why, even when fans beg for just one photo, she stays protective. And it's why her public-facing sparkle can coexist with a very private seriousness behind the scenes. Because the truth is, Dolly's love story has never been loud. It's been steady. And steady love doesn't need an audience. Now, does that mean everything has been perfect? Dolly has never sold her marriage as a fairy tale. She's admitted they're different people. She's joked that the reason it worked is because they give each other space. Space that most celebrity couples never allow themselves. And that line hits harder when you realize Dolly's entire career is built on people wanting a piece of her. Carl, by choosing not to want that piece, may be the one person who made it possible for her to survive fame without losing herself. So when Dolly hits 80 and starts moving like someone protecting her time, protecting her home life, protecting her energy, it makes sense. Because she spent decades building the biggest public persona imaginable while guarding a small private world that matters more than all of it. And here's the open question the birthday tributes don't answer. If Carl Dean is the reason Dolly has always had a real life to return to, what happens when Dolly starts behaving like that real life is becoming her main priority? Because once you start looking at her recent choices through that lens, the retirement rumors stop sounding like gossip and start sounding like a misunderstanding of what Dolly keeps trying to say. She's not disappearing. She's rearranging. And the next chapter is where we track exactly how that rearranging shows up. Why she keeps saying not yet, even as the signs keep piling up. By the time a legend turns 80, the public starts acting like there are only two options left: a farewell tour or a disappearance. And Dolly Parton has been dealing with that narrative for years. Every time she skips a big run of dates, every time she sounds a little more reflective in an interview, every time she chooses a one-off appearance over a full-blown tour, the same rumor pops back up like it's seasonal. Dolly's retiring. But here's what's so fascinating, and honestly kind of heartbreaking, about Dolly's retirement headlines. They almost never match what she's actually saying. Because Dolly has never sounded like someone eager to stop. She sounds like someone trying to stay in control of how she keeps going. There's a huge difference. When she's asked directly, Dolly's answers usually land in that classic Parton way: warm, funny, and slightly slippery. She'll joke about slowing down, she'll acknowledge she's earned the right to take it easier, and then she'll pivot into what she is excited about. And if you're not paying attention, it sounds like she's dodging. But if you are paying attention, you realize she's drawing a map. Dolly doesn't say, "I'm done." She says in 100 different ways, "I'm still here. I'm just not doing it like I used to." And the biggest clue is the touring conversation, because touring is where the myth and the reality collide. Fans want the full, old-school Dolly experience. City after city, a big production, that feeling of being in the same room with her. But Dolly has been candid that the kind of touring schedule people romanticize is physically demanding, and it steals time from the private life she clearly values more as she ages. So she's adjusted the deal. Instead of long tours, she'll do special shows, big moments, carefully chosen stages that feel worth the cost. She'll record, she'll create, she'll pop up when it matters. But she's not signing herself up for the grind just to prove she still can. That's not retirement. That's boundaries. And when you zoom out, her recent career pattern makes even more sense. Dolly has leaned harder into projects that let her work without losing her life. Recording an album doesn't require living out of a suitcase for months. Writing doesn't demand she be on in front of thousands of people night after night. Even big public moments, TV specials, award appearances, surprise performances, are controlled bursts. She can give the world Dolly Parton at full wattage and still go home. And she's made it clear home matters. That's what makes the retirement rumor cycle feel almost lazy, because it ignores the obvious truth sitting right in front of us. Dolly isn't stepping away from creativity. She's stepping away from anything that makes her feel like she's losing time. And she's not subtle about it anymore. Listen to how she talks about the future. The language isn't frantic. It isn't, "I have to do everything while I still can." It's calmer than that, almost practical. Like she's choosing with intention now, because the one thing she can't manufacture, no matter how legendary she is more hours. But here's where the emotional tension kicks in. Because Dolly's not just managing a career. She's managing an entire country's expectations. When people hear Dolly might retire, they react like they're losing a family member. And that reaction is sweet, but it's also pressure. It turns a human decision into a public crisis. It makes her personal pacing feel like a betrayal. So Dolly keeps saying not yet. Not because she's scared to stop, but because she understands what her presence represents to people. And she's trying to transition gently without making the world panic. And you can see that tension in how she picks her moments now. She'll do something massive, drop a bold project, show up somewhere unexpected, remind everyone she's still got that spark, and then she'll pull back again. Creates whiplash for casual fans. They don't know which Dolly they're getting, the unstoppable icon or the careful curator. The truth is, they're getting both. And that combination, huge public bursts paired with quieter private choices, is exactly what you see when someone is reorganizing their life around something the public doesn't fully understand. Which brings us to the question nobody can answer from the headlines alone. If Dolly isn't retiring, what is she preparing for? Because the more she sets boundaries, the more the world clings tighter, and that creates a new kind of burden. Being the person everyone depends on for hope, humor, and comfort. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk about that burden, how Dolly became America's emotional safety blanket, and what it costs her to keep showing up like one. There's a strange thing that happens when you become as loved as Dolly Parton. People stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a place, a safe place, a familiar place, a place they can go when the news is ugly, when their life is falling apart, when the world feels meaner than it used to. Dolly doesn't just have fans. She has people who emotionally lean on her. And for decades, she's been willing to hold that weight with a smile. But around 80, you can feel the tension in the role she never officially applied for. America's comfort person. Because comfort comes with expectations. Dolly is one of the rare celebrities people insist must remain pure. She's expected to be funny but never cruel, outspoken but never divisive, glamorous but never intimidating, successful but still humble enough. Political enough to be useful but not political enough to be hated. She has to be everyone's favorite version of a human being. At the same time, and what's wild is, she's pulled it off. Not by being fake, by being disciplined. Dolly's kindness is real, but it's also a choice she makes again and again. She's talked over the years about trying to look for the good in people, trying to keep her spirit up, trying to avoid bitterness. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because you work at it. And working at it for 60+ years is exhausting in a way most fans don't consider, because we only see the finished product. The joke, the wink, the line that disarms a room. We don't see what it takes to keep delivering that, even when life is doing what life always does. Taking people, changing your body, shrinking your patience, testing your faith. Dolly has had loss. She's had grief. She's had those off-camera seasons where the world is still demanding the same sparkle, while your private life is asking for something quieter. Over the years she's spoken about family, about people she's loved and lost, about how life keeps moving whether you're ready or not. And yet she shows up. That's the part that can make you emotional when you really sit with it. Dolly keeps showing up for us, even though she doesn't owe the public anything. And it's not just music. When communities hurt, Dolly has a pattern of stepping in. When people are struggling, she finds a way to help that doesn't come with a lecture. When there's fear, she offers something steady. Sometimes with money, sometimes with a message, sometimes with a simple reminder that you're not alone. Fans praise her for being generous, but there's another side to that generosity that people don't talk about. Once the world decides you're the good one, they start treating you like a public utility, like you're supposed to be available, like you're supposed to fix things, like you're supposed to stay alive forever, because people have built their emotional safety net out of your existence. And Dolly knows that. She's smart enough to understand her role in the culture, which is why her recent tone, especially as she approached 80, has felt more protective. Not selfish, protective, because there's a line between being beloved and being claimed. And Dolly has always walked that line with humor. She'll make you laugh, she'll distract you, she'll switch the subject just before it gets too heavy. But then she'll drop a sentence that hits like a truth you weren't expecting. Something about time, something about slowing down, something about how she wants to spend her days. And for a second, you see the human being behind the symbol. The human being who still has to wake up and decide what her energy is worth. The human being who still has to choose between giving the world another Dolly moment or staying home and protecting her peace. That's why 80 feels like a turning point. Not because Dolly is fading, but because she's finally allowing the public to sense the cost of constant comfort. And here's where the story gets even more interesting. When someone like Dolly starts protecting their energy, they don't just say no more often. They start saying yes differently. They choose projects that mean something. Projects that feel like messages. Projects that feel, whether she admits it or not, like they're meant to last beyond her. Which brings us to the next question. If Dolly is quietly stepping out of the role of endless comfort, in the way we're used to, what is she stepping into instead? Because one of her recent creative choices looked, on the surface, like a fun reinvention, but when you place it next to everything else, it starts to look like something more personal, almost like a legacy move hiding in plain sight. She's been speaking, just not always with the kind of quotes that turn into trending topics. At 80, Dolly's career moves don't feel like she's trying to stay relevant. They feel like she's trying to leave receipts of who she really is, in case the world ever reduces her to a wig, a laugh, and a greatest hits playlist. And the biggest sign is how she's been using music lately. When Dolly was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it created one of those pop culture moments that could have been purely celebratory. Except Dolly, being Dolly, complicated it. She initially questioned whether she fit the category, like she didn't want to take up space she hadn't earned in that lane. Then she did what she always does when she commits. She went all in. And that all in wasn't just showing up for a speech. It turned into an entire creative pivot, one that surprised people who think they already know what Dolly Parton is allowed to be. She made Rockstar, a rock-leaning project packed with collaborations and big, bold choices. On paper, it's fun. Dolly reimagining herself, stepping into an arena people don't associate with her, proving she can do anything she wants. But when you place that decision beside the quieter changes in her life, the boundary setting, the careful pacing, the reflective tone, it starts to feel like more than fun. Feels like a statement, almost like she's saying, before anyone tries to freeze me into one version of myself, let me show you the whole range. And that's what makes Dolly different from other icons at this stage. Some legends coast. Some retreat into nostalgia. Dolly keeps creating, just with a sharper filter. She's not collecting moments anymore. She's selecting them. Because Dolly knows something fans forget. Legacy isn't just what you did. It's what you leave people with. And her legacy choices lately have been pointing in two directions at once. Music that expands her story. Meaning that outlasts her story. You can hear it in the way she talks about faith and purpose. Dolly has never been preachy, but she's also never hidden where her spirit comes from. Her songs have always had that undercurrent, grace, humility, the idea that you're meant to use what you're given. Even when she's cracking jokes, she'll slip in something simple and honest about God, prayer, gratitude, like it's as normal as breathing. And as she's gotten older, that purpose language comes through more clearly. Not in a dramatic goodbye way, more like someone taking inventory. What mattered? What helped people? What did I do that had real weight? That's why she's been drawn to projects that feel like more than entertainment. Even when she's doing something flashy, there's usually a message inside it. About being yourself, about kindness, about not letting the world harden you. And then there are the choices she makes that don't come with a stage. The appearances she turns down. The pace she refuses to keep. The way she protects certain parts of her life as if she's guarding something fragile and sacred. Because she is. Dolly's private life isn't just privacy for privacy's sake. It's a value system. It's her saying, I can give you my art. I can give you my laughter. I can even give you huge pieces of my time. But I will not give you the part of me that I need to survive. And if you listen carefully, she's been hinting at a very specific kind of legacy, one that has nothing to do with charts. She lights up when she talks about helping kids, about books, about making sure people have a chance, about doing something real in her home state. It's always been there, but lately it's felt even more central, like she's quietly shifting the spotlight away from Dolly the entertainer and toward Dolly the builder. And here's the part that gets emotional if you let it sink in. A lot of celebrities donate. Dolly designs systems. Systems that can run without applause. Without photo ops. Without her name being shouted in arenas. Which raises a question that doesn't get asked enough. Because it's not as shiny as an album announcement. Why has Dolly been structuring so much of her work like it's meant to keep going even when she's not there to personally carry it? Because once you start following that thread, past the music, past the jokes, past the public image, you find a side of Dolly's impact that's so massive it almost doesn't feel real, and it leads straight into what she's been doing quietly, consistently, when nobody's watching. By this point, you can almost see Dolly's two worlds running side by side. There's the world we all know, the superstar, the style, the songs, the one-liners that make even a tough interview feel like a porch conversation. And then there's the other world. The one where Dolly Parton moves like a builder, not a celebrity. The world where the biggest thing she's done might not be a hit record at all. It might be a system designed to keep working whether anyone applauds it or not. That's why, when people ask, what happened to Dolly at 80? The answer isn't a scandal. It isn't some dramatic meltdown. It's something quieter, and honestly more emotional than gossip. It's the realization that Dolly has been spending years putting pieces in place that don't require Dolly to be present. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Start with the thing almost everyone has heard of, but not everyone has fully processed: the imagination library. It sounds simple when it's explained quickly: free books for kids. But the scale is the part that sneaks up on you. Over the years, it has delivered hundreds of millions of books to children, and it operates through a model that's bigger than one person writing checks. It's partnerships. It's local affiliates. It's a repeatable structure that can expand into new communities without needing Dolly to personally stand there and announce it each time. That matters because it tells you how her mind works. A lot of famous people do philanthropy in a way that still centers their fame. A big gala, a big headline, a big moment. Dolly's most powerful giving is often designed to be almost boring, reliable, automatic. Like she's not chasing the dopamine of praise. She's chasing impact you can measure in real life. A kid sitting on a floor with a book in their hands, a parent realizing their child has something that belongs to them, a family getting one more reason to believe the future can be different. And that's where the try not to cry part starts creeping in, because you realize Dolly didn't build this to be impressive. She built it because she remembers what it's like not to have much. She's talked for years about growing up poor in the Smoky Mountains, about being one of 12 kids, about how little can stretch if you're careful, how love can be abundant even when money isn't. And when you understand that background, her entire philanthropic life stops looking like generosity and starts looking like a personal mission she never outgrew. But the imagination library is only one piece. There have been moments, publicly reported and widely documented, where Dolly steps into crisis not with a tweet but with a plan. When wildfires devastated areas near her home in Tennessee, her response wasn't just sympathy. It was structured support through her My People effort, providing direct help to families who needed it. During the pandemic, her name surfaced in connection with funding for medical research, again not as a publicity stunt but as a straightforward "here's what I can do" move. And what's striking isn't just that she gives. It's how she gives. She gives like someone who doesn't want the recipient to feel like a prop in a feel-good story. She gives like someone who understands dignity. Quietly, directly, often with minimal fanfare. Sometimes you only hear about it because the results become too big to hide. And this is where Dolly at 80 starts to look less like an artist aging and more like a person organizing her legacy. Because you don't create systems like this by accident. You create them when you've learned two hard truths. Need doesn't go away just because the cameras do. A single person, no matter how famous, cannot physically be everywhere forever. So she builds something that can be everywhere without her. That's the part that makes her feel almost maternal to people. Not in a cheesy way, in a real way. She's out here mothering entire communities through structures that keep feeding people opportunity. And when you hit 80, that kind of work takes on a different emotional color. Because whether Dolly says it outright or not, the message inside the structure is clear. This is meant to last. Not last while I'm trending. Last when I'm not in the room. Which brings us back to the question that's been hanging over every chapter. Why has she been so intentional about building a version of her impact that can run without her? Is it just smart planning, something any responsible person would do when they've built something big? Or is it tied to something more personal, something that explains the careful way she's been guarding her time, her home life, and the parts of her world she refuses to sell? By the time Dolly Parton hit 80, the clues weren't hidden anymore, they were just scattered. One quote here. One career choice there. One, I don't want to tour like that anymore moment that fans brushed off because, well, it's Dolly. She'll say something heavy and then soften it with a laugh, and the world exhales and moves on. But when you line the pieces up, birthday tone, schedule changes, the way she protects her home life, the careful yes instead of endless yes, you start to see a pattern that feels almost like a handwritten letter. Not dramatic, not morbid, intentional. Dolly has always treated time like it matters. She grew up in a house where you didn't waste anything. Not flour, not fabric, not daylight. And when you listen to her now, it's like she's applying that same mountain logic to her life. Use what you've got, love hard, do good work, and don't spend your remaining energy on things that don't matter. That's why the retirement conversation misses the point. The story isn't that Dolly is stopping. The story is that she's redefining what working means at 80. And she's not doing it for the industry. She's doing it for herself. Look at how she's been moving. She'll still create music, collaborations, projects that excite her. She'll still show up when it's meaningful, when it's fun, when it feels like a moment worth having. But she's been less willing to sign away months of her life to a grind schedule that leaves no room for the private world she's protected for decades. That private world keeps coming back to the same center. The home life she built with Carl Dean, the life that never needed an audience to be real. And here's the part that hits hardest when you're honest about it. Dolly's public persona is so huge that people forget she's been living a full, separate life right alongside it. A marriage that was never part of the show. A routine that never needed fans. A love story that didn't have to be photographed to be valid. So when Dolly starts talking more about being home, about choosing what she does and doesn't do, it doesn't feel like a celebrity slowing down. It feels like someone reclaiming the part of her life that fame couldn't swallow. At the same time, she's also been doing something else. Something you only notice if you stop thinking of Dolly as a performer and start thinking of her as a planner. Because the philanthropic systems she's built, especially the literacy work, don't just look like generosity. They look like continuity. They look like she asked herself a question most of us avoid. If I'm not here to personally push this forward, will it still move? And then she built the answer. That's not a random thing someone does on a whim. That's the kind of thing you do when you've reached a certain point in life and you realize legacy isn't a trophy, it's a structure. It's what keeps working after the applause fades. Now layer on one more truth. Dolly's image has always been light, bright, funny, safe. But the woman underneath has never been shallow. She's written about heartbreak, poverty, longing, faith, complicated family love. The stuff people spend whole lifetimes trying to put into words. She knows how to carry sadness without letting it poison her. She knows how to keep hope alive without pretending life is easy. And around 80, you can hear that wisdom more clearly. Not because she's suddenly gotten serious, but because she's more willing to let seriousness sit in the room for a second before she rescues everyone with a joke. That's the shift fans have been sensing. Dolly isn't dimming. She's clarifying. She's still glitter and humor, yes. But she's also moving like someone who knows exactly what her priorities are now, and she's not negotiating them with anyone. And when you see all of this together, Dolly at 80 starts to look like two things at once. A beginning because she's still creating, still dreaming, still proving she can reinvent herself whenever she feels like it. And a goodbye, not in the sense of I'm leaving, but in the sense of I'm preparing the world to not demand me the way it used to. That's a different kind of farewell. A quiet one. The kind that doesn't announce itself with a final tour, but shows up in choices. Fewer long stretches away from home, more projects that can live on their own, more boundaries that protect what's sacred. And then there's one last detail. Small, easy to miss if you're only watching headlines. That makes the whole story turn from Dolly is aging gracefully into something much more personal. It's a choice she's been building toward for years, tied to love, privacy, and a promise she's guarded so fiercely that most fans don't even realize it exists. So here's the question that changes everything. What did Dolly quietly put in motion, right as she reached 80? That suggests she's not just managing a career, but protecting the most important part of her life for whatever comes next.